Welcome everyone. Welcome to this episode of Bar Student to Barrister, the podcast on your journey to the bar through pupillage and beyond, of course, into the early years of practice. And I am absolutely delighted today to welcome Anu Lal, who is a tenant at 14 Chambers here at Gray's Inn, where we are right now. And I'm going to be asking Anu a number of questions, but I'm sure you will be extraordinarily interested in her unique journey to the bar. Before we move on, there's something that I do with a lot of the guests on this podcast, and I'd like to start, if I may, Anu, by reading something from your Chambers profile. I think it gives us a really helpful introduction. Anu is frequently instructed in financial remedy proceedings at all stages, including final hearings. She has provided advice and representation in an application for financial relief after a foreign divorce under Part 3 of the Matrimonial and Family Proceedings Act. In private children proceedings, Anu is regularly instructed in cases involving allegations of alienating behaviours, domestic abuse, including sexual abuse. She has also appeared in the High Court on a matter involving a question of forum convenience. Outside of her practice, Anu sits as a board member of Bridging the Bar, I'll be asking about that, a charity committed to improving diversity at the bar. Before completing pupillage, Anu worked for the Inns of Court College of Advocacy, as well as Bridging the Bar, and carried out work in non-legal roles such as project management and recruitment within mental health social work. And I just want to go forward a little bit more about your profile, Anu, if that's okay, because in terms of your education, it says that you have a law degree in LLB from King's College London. You also did a master's degree at King's in mental health ethics and law. And you didn't stop there, of course, because then you came and joined the Inns of Court College of Advocacy, the ICCA, or ICA, as most people call it, to do your bar practice course. And on the way, you picked up an astonishing amount of scholarships. You have the Guru Nanak Social Mobility Scholarship, first place essay prize winner. You have the Middle Temple Jules Thorne Scholarship, the Middle Temple Blackstone Entrance Exhibition Award, the 1KBW Family Law Essay Competition Winner Award. You have the Garden Court Chambers Inderpal Rahul Memorial Trust Award and the King's College London Dixon Poon School of Law Scholarship. What an amazing amount of scholarships you've managed to achieve. That's amazing. On top of that, apart from, of course, being a first-class speaker of English, you also speak Punjabi and Hindi. And that, everyone, is just the start. Let's go back to the beginning. Your bio at another part mentions that you have a background in social work. Tell us about that, and when you decided, in fact, that law was something you were interested in at undergraduate level.
Well, thanks for having me, Chris.
It's an absolute pleasure.
In terms of my background in social work recruitment, it was actually the other way around. I always knew I wanted to be a barrister. Since I was doing my GCSEs, I decided I wanted to be a barrister. I think it was in year 10 of school. My school took part in the National Bar Mock Trial competition, and I went to a regular state school. We didn't have opportunities like that given to us all of the time. But I think there was a student whose father was a barrister and sort of introduced the idea to the school. And as part of that, we were mentored, a small group of us were mentored by a criminal barrister who came from a Chambers, which I believe is now the 36 group, and mentored us and readied us for this competition. And that was it. And so my background in social work recruitment sort of came about as a result of a slight detour I took after my undergraduate degree, which involved me working in social work recruitment, in the corporate sector, and in a number of other jobs, which in the end all came together to make me, I believe, a better barrister today.
So was there something along that journey? Was it the mentoring, or was it anything you did practically that really sparked your interest in the bar? The question, I guess, is one that you will have been asked, Nanu, a million times, I suspect. What made you decide that you wanted to become a barrister? Was it that mentoring? Was it something else along the way? What was that?
Well, I think during the competition itself, I really enjoyed the thrill and that adrenaline of standing on my feet and not quite knowing what's going to happen next. Sounds a bit masochistic, but actually I found it quite thrilling to be pushed to my very limit. One, on the basis of things I could have possibly read and retained, but also having to think creatively under that time pressure really felt quite thrilling. But later on, as my career and as things progressed, I really fell in love with the idea of representing people, of speaking for ordinary folk and people from all walks of life, really, and supporting them with something that can be very difficult for them. The legal process can be rather inaccessible to a lot of people for a number of reasons. And the idea of almost being an interpreter and guiding them through a process and taking their instruction and putting that case forward in court, it's rewarding as well as intellectually stimulating for me.
Can I highlight something you said there? Because you mentioned that you found it thrilling, almost this concept of the unknown that you say also was partially masochistic. A lot of people will find what's thrilling nerve-wracking. They're two interrelated concepts.
Yes.
I think a lot of people will be interested. How do you turn the nerves, if you like, into a thrill, into excitement?
It's such a fine line.
Yeah.
And I would be lying if I said that there weren't times that I was nervous or I didn't have butterflies or bubbles in my tummy before going to do things. Still in this early stage of my career, I'd be absolutely lying. The matter I had in the High Court, I was there for the entire day. I was not being led by anyone. My knees were knocking that morning. In terms of managing that stress, it's different in the job itself because there is someone sitting behind you very much counting on you. And that propels me it motivates me to stay as calm as I can. But actually, I learned a lot of the coping mechanisms and a lot of the strategies for myself during my pupillage interview season. And things that work for me. They won't necessarily work for others. But I had practiced yoga in the past and I do Pilates now, and that real deep diaphragmatic breathing really helps to calm me down. Doing that for far longer than I think I need to do it, that's part of it. Having normal conversations with the person preparing coffee in the morning, that will really help to take the edge off of just thinking about that case or that thing that I'm nervous about. But also, there's no getting around being properly prepared, spending as much time as you can behind the curtain, as it were, before you get on stage, and just going through your papers or whatever you have to do to whatever you're preparing. That there's no cutting corners to that hard work and that graft that you've got to put in.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. We know what the genesis was of your interest in becoming a barrister. What made you interested particularly in family law? I'm going to ask you a bit more about family law in a bit, but what, at an early stage, what drew you towards the family bar?
Well, Chris, like I said, the first person I met who was a real life barrister in my little town was a criminal barrister. Yeah. And so that was really the avenue through which I could even imagine a career at the bar. She set me up very helpfully. She set me up with a criminal mini pupillage, and it was terribly exciting. I still remember sitting in the public gallery. It was a drug trafficking case, all very interesting. when I was researching a bit more about careers at the bar, and that might have been about 10 years ago, things were different, and I was concerned slightly about the remuneration for junior criminal barristers.
I guess that was particularly when it was in the headlines and we were moving into strikes from the criminal bar.
Yes, but perhaps even before that. I think it still was not the best. Yeah. And I think that there is a real choice to be made in being a junior criminal barrister. And that's not to say anything. I think it's the most thrilling job. I think that was part of my decision to say, actually, perhaps that's not for me. That's not perhaps the life that I want to have. And then when I was in law school, I did various modules that were very helpful, those elective modules, one of which was in medical law. So I thought, let me apply for a personal injury mini pupillage. Did that. Not quite for me either. Did a family mini pupillage alongside my family law module at university. I did one. Oh, quite like this. Did another. And the more I exposed myself to what the family bar was like, albeit through mini pupillages, it was incredibly helpful. And that just ignited an interest into reading cases, following developments that were going on in family law. And I think that really does capture my initial spark, which was representing people from all walks of life and guiding them through difficult times in their life through the legal system.
It's really interesting because it's already been raised actually by another guest that sometimes what you enjoy as a module, a subject at undergraduate or even at postgraduate level doesn't necessarily indicate what you will enjoy practically at the bar. Personally, I think that what you did, you go through that process of elimination in some ways during the mini pupillages by understanding on the ground what this particular area of practice feels like, what it looks like, and whether it's for you. Would you agree with that?
Totally. I think it's important to know what you don't want in order to sort of guide you towards what you do want, if that's not altogether clear at the start.
Yeah. Okay, so let me take family law. A lot of people, I suspect, think they know what family law is. They probably think it's disputes about where a child is going to be living or whether which parent or guardian a child has contact with. I don't even know if it's still called contact, Anu. It used to be.
You can call it contact, that's fine.
What's it called now?
It's called spending time arrangements
Oh,
now.
is it? Okay, well, everything's changed. It just goes to... I did a common law pupillage, general common law pupillage, so a long time ago I did some of those. It was called contact then. Anyway, I'm revealing my ignorance. Why I'm asking you the question. What is family law in a broader sense? And just reading your bio, there's financial matters, there's a vast amount of matters that actually I think the common perception doesn't even touch upon. Give us a sense of what you do and what family law is really all about.
Of course. I mean, people think it is divorce and children.
Yeah.
And to some extent, it is divorce and children. But when you break that down and you work out just how much those lines can be blurred between practice areas, it was something I wasn't quite prepared for when I'd started out, even as a pupil. But family law can really veer into, for example, if you're dealing with financial remedies, but there are lots of business interests involved, or there are tax issues to resolve, or there might be, cross-jurisdictional issues that will come up in some, high net worth cases. That is something that it bears having a level of understanding about. Equally, there might be international Hague Convention issues, and understanding that can make you better in the job, as it were. But even more, it goes into tax, it goes into criminal proceedings. Sometimes, in a number of my cases, there are ongoing criminal proceedings as there are family. And so there needs to be a level of understanding between those parallel sets of proceedings. So family law, and I quite enjoy that it bleeds into different areas. And some people, some family practitioners choose to specialise, and they choose to go more in the sort of financial side of things, or more into the public children side of things, where the state is intervening in a child's life for their safety. But day to day, the job can look, no 2 days are the same. And I quite enjoy that about the job, and it bears thinking about whether a person may want a job where they don't do the same thing every day. And I knew that because I'd worked in an office every day, and I'd gone to the same place, and I've got the same desk and the same snacks in my drawer. And it's those sorts of things it does bear thinking about. But in terms of family, the family bar, I might be preparing for a conference or having a conference with a client, meeting them, talking them through what I consider to be the best points in their case, and perhaps points that we want to think about and insulate the client a bit more in respect of, working out strategy and we're sort of thinking about the hearing that we have ahead of us, but also how's that going to look at a trial? How is that going to look 3 hearings down the line? Thinking about those sorts of things, drafting written pieces of advice, obviously representing people in person in court. There's that to think of, the conferences with the clients to think of. And sometimes in this job, I can read all of my papers and know things, as well as I possibly can before going to court. And then I meet my client in conference. And I had a funny instance of this a couple of weeks ago at court. And I meet my client, I meet the parties, whoever's there. And the emotional dynamics, the relational history is something I can never really appreciate, even after I might have finished the hearing. It's something that I say to my clients, you're the expert in that. You know more than I will ever know about that. But what I can do is try to help you tell me that, so I can best understand the bigger picture and represent you. So, I might learn the majority of the motivation of my client once I get there. I had a hearing where I was prepared to go in all guns blazing, as it were. But once I'd met my client, I realised that perhaps she needed some more time to think through what she was doing. And perhaps she wasn't prepared to go through the court process for months on end. And it was just working out how to adjust tone. And that's incredibly important at the family bar. It's incredibly important to know when perhaps the role might be important to be more of a mediator between parties, or when there is a need to be more adversarial. And it's really using judgment. Judgment's incredibly important in this job, because these are children and these are people's lives, these are people's domestic lives. And so it's all well and good, going home after a hearing, but those are the people that are left with the reverberations of whatever's just happened at court. So I could talk for ages. It's really interesting to me, and I really enjoy being a part of people's family lives, but it can be very varied too.
Yeah, I mean, it's great to hear that you are so obviously passionate about what you do. I remember, as I say, a long time ago, Anu, doing family law. I actually found it really difficult because of that emotional dimension, if you like, where people were dealing with their children, where they were going to live, who they were going to see, and of course, interrelated with that, the finance. How am I going to afford, especially if it's one thing when there's a vast pot of money to share, but that's often not the case. And emotions get very, very high. And I found when I eventually moved into crime that many people found the concept of losing, i.e. being found guilty and doing a stretch inside, far easier, weirdly, to cope with, well, perhaps not weirdly, to cope with than the idea of a judge saying, no, the child is with him or her and not with you. Mm-hmm. And how do you, because you are so cool, calm and collected, it seems to me, how do you deal with that when you get home at the end of the day? Is that where the yoga and the Pilates comes in?
And the friends.
And the friends.
Yes.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept. I'm really interested.
Yes, I mean, just on that first point, Chris, I think emotional resilience is incredibly important in at the bar, I'm sure, but in family law, I can only speak for family law, it is incredibly important. And in terms of how does a person build their emotional resilience? Well, life experiences, I can only speak for myself. Life experiences might do it. Personal difficulties that a person may face, that might do it. I worked with mental health service users. I worked with, volunteered with a number of people who may be emotionally quite unpredictable at times. And so those experiences really fostered in me an ability to observe and also to safeguard. I did some crisis counselling during the pandemic, and this wasn't one of those, let me boost up my CV with doing something. It was something I genuinely felt was important because people's mental health was really struggling during the pandemic. So I trained for a number of weeks as a crisis counsellor, and it was really life and death. It was stark, the kinds of issues that people were getting in touch with. And it's very similar to Samaritans. There's no knowing who you'd be in touch with and who you'd be put in touch with and exactly how that would play out. And it was working out how to risk assess, how to stay calm under pressure. I've always had the most respect, but I have the most respect for paramedics who turn up and they've really got to manage a situation. But it's something adjacent to that. In terms of how I look after myself within that, again, it's a matter for each person to work out what recharges them. But that's the concept. It's the concept of recharge. And once a person works out, and once I worked out, these are the things that make me feel recharged, these are the things that make me feel depleted, it's very good to then implement those. I can be quite organised, I think, as you know, Chris. And so my personal calendar has got everything. It's got my work and all sorts of things. And I colour code things. So, where there's, Pilates classes, they're in a certain colour, where I'm volunteering, where I'm working, where I'm doing something fun with my friends. And I look at that calendar and I think, is there enough of a rainbow there? And that's a great first catch for me to sort of see whether I'm having as well-rounded a life as I could be. Now, that's really difficult in practice. Even during my pupillage, as disciplined as I was with, being presentable, being on time, reading my papers as much as I was supposed to, I was equally disciplined with making sure I had avenues for myself, whether it's with my friends, for fun. It could be something as simple as going to the movies by myself one night, or I'm going to have a daytime Sunday nap because I'm really tired. Things that are just for me. I think, yes, it's helpful at the bar, but it's helpful in life. There are 100 things to be dreary about in life. And I think it's really important to look after oneself. And well-being's always been and always is something that's really important to me.
And I've never heard it described as a rainbow before. I absolutely love that. There's always a golden nugget that comes out. And I think that there may be more, Anu, but that for me is a golden nugget of a description and a piece of advice for people. It's a wonderful way of having an overview, an easy overview actually, of the breadth and variety of one's life. Absolutely wonderful. Okay, a lot of people listening to this podcast will be thinking, here you are at 14 Chambers, a successful family practitioner with a really interesting practice. You did your many pupillages. Once you decided you had that bug and you thought, that's what I want to do. I want to be a barrister, and I want to be a family law barrister. And presumably at that stage you started doing your research towards applying for pupillage. A lot of people would be interested. How do you go about that? I suspect you're going to say in a very organised way, but what approach did you take, Anu, to choosing Chambers and making those applications?
You took the words out of my mouth, Chris. I can be quite organised and methodical. I had a spreadsheet, and it was a spreadsheet with a number of tabs. And actually, in advance of recording this with you, I had a look at that spreadsheet, found it in a Google Drive somewhere, and it was a lot of work. And like I said before, there is no getting around putting in the hours towards something. And I believe that in my first cycle of applying, I was working full time, and I was doing part 1 of the ICA bar course at the same time. So it was a lot on my plate. And I remember having to be really methodical about how I went about it. So I had a spreadsheet and I had a number of columns, and these were things that are important to me. So, size of the chambers, their ethos, that was something that was quite the culture. That was important to me. The number of junior members, how many of those juniors went to Oxbridge, how many of those juniors got firsts. And I went through so many chambers websites and looking at each member.
Looking at their profiles.
Those who sort of up to 10 years call. I did that. And I really sort of worked out trends, patterns, and I tried to analyse the data that was in front of me once I'd put it all in my spreadsheet to work out, 1, where do I want to go? And 2, where do I think I am their type? And sort of just matching that up. And my perception of being someone's type doesn't necessarily, I may have got it wrong, and I was okay with that. So I would sort of always punt and go for things. I also worked out, I think a mentor of mine advised me or suggested that I rank chambers. And this was my own system based on all the things that were important to me.
You're not talking about the legal 500 here.
This was my legal 500.
Your legal 500.
It's my chamber's 500. But I ranked them, and it was really good to see of those that I'd made applications to, where exactly I'd done well and where I'd not. So I had a separate sheet on my spreadsheet that was working out between cycle 1 and cycle 2. So I applied, I got my pupillage in the second cycle. But looking at cycle 1, I almost exit interviewed myself. It's my recruitment background coming in again. And I was working out, okay, what percentage of, what was my conversion rate in getting from paper sift to first round? What was my conversion rate in getting from first round to second round? And thereafter getting, I think I was a reserve or something like that, the first cycle. And I worked out, okay, half of my paper applications went to first round. And then once I'd secured interviews, I was more likely to secure a second round. So that told me that in my second cycle, let's look at the paper sift stage and let's try and improve that. I mean, 50% is not bad, but that was the level of analysis that I really undertook when applying for pupillage. I don't even know if that answers your question, Chris.
No, I just think it's fascinating, the level of analysis. I think that's a great example of, I think, what many people would call reflective practice,
yes,
albeit prior to practice.
Yes.
And that's absolutely fascinating. And it's a really good indicator of focus and the energy and time that all of that takes. During this process, presumably, you were doing your bar training, is that right?
Yes. So I did my bar practice course, as you've said already, at the ICCA, and part 1, I took it slower than others might have, because for 10 months of that I was working full time. So I was trying to incorporate my learning as best I could, and then closer to the time that I was going to sit my litigation exams, I left my job, bit of a risk, but I did it, and took the exams and then started part 2. It was incredibly motivating having a small cohort in part 2 who were all very ambitious. And there's a phrase in the Bible, funny enough, that's iron sharpens iron. And it really was that idea that I am with people who are sharpening me, pruning me, and helping me to get better. It was also very helpful that some of those people had pupillage already. So it was incredibly motivating to sort of look left and look right, and not with a view of comparison in an ugly sense.
Yeah.
comparison can be quite motivating actually, and it can spur on that determination, because there will come times in this journey of applying to the bar that the motivation can lag a little bit, and you need things to spur you on and keep you going. But yes, during that time I was doing the bar course, and then, doing all those things to help put bows on my CV, and some of the scholarships you mentioned, essay writing competitions, applying for all of those things. And so, what I spoke about earlier, that rainbow, that looked different, not because it wasn't a rainbow, but my me time would look like taking the dogs for a walk rather than spending 3 hours at the movies. I was time poor at the time because I was spread across so many different endeavours at the time. But it doesn't mean it can't be done.
Yeah, I mean, I often think when I've got, I'm as good as anyone at prevarication, putting things off, thinking, oh, do you know what? No, I want to watch that film, or I want to do whatever. And then I think to myself, well, actually, I'm probably not going to remember that film or that show on Netflix. This evening will go one way or the other. So I can use it just to do this work. And I'll come out tomorrow essentially either having done the work or not. And frankly, I could be in a better place for having done the work. Let me ask you about this. So you make your applications for pupillage, your spreadsheet is before you with all of these, and your diary with all these wonderful colours. I'll ask you about some of those colours in a moment. But you go along to a pupillage interview. Can you give the viewers and the listeners a sense of what one would experience through the application process for family practice, for family law pupillage?
The paper applications can be quite varied, but not so varied that it's not worth preparing, even before the gateway opens. There are a number of questions which are common. Why do you want to do family law? Why do you think you'd be a good family barrister? Those are things that I would encourage people to start thinking about sooner than later. Start thinking about what some of the core competencies are of a family barrister in particular, and how someone's experiences can match up. I've never worked in a law firm. I've never been a paralegal or a legal assistant. And so naturally, all of my examples, when I was explaining how I can demonstrate various competencies, they were all non-legal or voluntary examples. It's possible to do that. But that sort of prep are things that people can do even prior to writing a single word on a Word document. But then when it comes to those paper applications, there might be an essay question, an area of reform in the area of family law, a topic of reform that might be newsworthy, or other newsworthy cases. The world that we live in quite like at the moment is things are politicised. Issues of family law can be politicised and discussed at length by social commentators, news anchors, whoever else. Those are interesting topics, and a panel is going to want to hear about someone explaining an interesting topic. It's a topic that I would say, if stuck with a choice of what do I write about, what topic do I choose, which is a question that some people can ask me when they're applying, I would say stick to something you know a lot about, but also something that your personality, your passion can come through. It's clear to a panel who have been sat with numb bums all day in a conference room like the one we're sitting in. It's clear when a person is passionate about something, when they actually care, and when they can speak about it eloquently, but persuasively and passionately too. Those sorts of questions might crop up. In terms of the interviews themselves, now they can be those competency-based questions. But the beautiful thing about the family bar is that personality really does matter. I say that carefully. As a pupil, as a prospective pupil or an applicant, it's incredibly important to maintain that veneer of professionalism. And so judgment will help inform a person about what's appropriate and what's not. And humour can be very hit and miss, and I don't make any recommendations for or against that. It really is a judgment call. But at the same time, personality can be very important in conveying to a panel, but also in future to one's client, I'm with you in this. We're going to walk through this together. And that level of compassion and reassurance is incredibly important. So interview panels can look like those sorts of competency questions, debate questions. I was asked to explain, to give a debate about, I think, the criminalisation or decriminalising physical chastisement of children, and then do the opposite argument.
Can I jump in there for a moment?
Of course.
Because I remember exactly the same thing back in the day, and I hesitate to say how long ago it was. But for example, argue why there should be the death penalty, and now, bam, argue why there shouldn't be. How did you go about preparing? Can you prepare for that, Anu, or is that just the way it is? You've just got to go in with an open mind. You've got to go in with energy, belief, passion, as you clearly have, and then everything will fall into place.
Yes and no in terms of preparation. I think it would be unwise not to prepare very key debates and topics that are happening at the time of your interview or a person's interview, especially when they are referenced in the paper form, especially when, if someone has said, this is the case I'm very interested in, or this is the topic I'm interested in, or I wrote a case comment on transgender rights about this case that had come out at the time that I was interviewing, and it hadn't featured in any of my written responses. It was in the sort of body, sort of the main bit of the form. And I think I was asked in an interview about transgender rights. Now, had I just done that for the sake of it and not actually read into that area and kept up to date with that area, I wouldn't have been able to tell the panel that actually there was a newer case that had just come out on that topic, but developing that area of law. So those are the things that can be done to prepare. But in terms of those wildcard questions, I'll call them, no, one can't prepare for every single question under the sun. And I think it would be a fool's errand to try to do so. I think on that note, I was asked in an interview if I were to be a Disney character, which one I would be and why. And I managed to think of something that made some sort of sense in the moment. But this goes on to my second point, which is, as much as the person can't prepare for a wildcard question, what we can prepare is how we will respond and react when it comes up. And it may not be the interview or the chambers you're expecting to give you that sort of question. But for me, it was those strategies I had to stay calm, to be unflustered, and to calm down so much that my nervous system isn't up there, it's down there, so my intellect somewhere could come to the fore and could really help me to think, what is the logic, unpick that. And you're doing that within milliseconds of a person asking you a question.
But you're giving yourself time to think.
And staying calm.
Yeah.
Staying calm so that I can come through, my intellect can come through.
Yeah. So you get a pupillage. What does that feel like?
I'll tell you the moment I found out. I was doing an advocacy class during my part 2 of the bar course, and naturally, the person who was teaching us that day knew that we'd all be getting calls.
Yeah.
And one foot there and one foot really there, and we were in the basement of Lincoln's Inn at that time. That's where the teaching was taking place, and there's no signal down there. So I believe I was getting a phone call, and I'd asked to run upstairs. I'd run up to the ground level, and I got a call from 14 to tell me that I'd got pupillage. And as happy as I was, there was a sort of numbness to it of like, right, what? And it's almost like finishing a marathon and then just stopping.
Yeah.
And you're like, but I'm in the running mode now.
Yeah.
But it was so good. But there is something I would say, I would encourage people to look after themselves after that happens, because when a person's striving towards something for so long, there can be a bit of a, well, what now? And of course, you've got over a year, haven't you, before.
Did you go back to your
start.
advocacy session?
I went there and I had a cheesy grin because other people were there too, and I didn't want to make anyone feel uncomfortable. So I sat there and I was like,
wonderful.
Tried my best to carry on.
And then you turn up on day one of your pupillage.
Yes.
You come here to Gray's Inn, you walk through the front door as I did moments ago.
Yeah.
What happens? Give us an idea of what happens during, I guess this is a crazy question, I was about to say, a typical week at the family bar. I guess there's no such thing. Give us a sense of what you engaged in during your pupillage.
Well, day one wasn't the first time I'd walked in here. Obviously, I've interviewed here.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of chambers now do induction days, which is incredibly helpful. So I'd come in during the summer, met my co-pupil Jack, and the head of pupillage sort of took us through various do's and don'ts, gave us a reading list, which was very helpful to have a read of over the summer. So coming into chambers felt not too daunting, but that's a testament to how wonderful my chambers is, and I'll try to temper that. Actually,
that says there's a lot of forethought and preparation involved in that, which obviously was very helpful to you.
Incredibly helpful, and as I say, I think chambers are moving more towards having worked in recruitment. There are, chambers don't always have recruitment members of staff necessarily. It's usually sort of shared between, barristers will pitch in, and there might be a committee of sorts. And so some of those things can fall through, whereas having worked in recruitment, there are clear processes. However, chambers are getting a lot better in general. And I think I've heard others' experiences which were fairly similar to mine. I knew who my supervisor was. I knew what he would be doing that day. It was a remote hearing in one of these conference rooms. I'd read the papers thoroughly because I was so afraid that I'd be asked something I wouldn't know. And it was a lot to take in. I think the first couple of weeks, especially, getting to grips with travelling around the country, or at least around the southeastern circuit every day, and reading brand new papers, different stories, different legal issues, and actually observing can be quite passive in some ways. So it really takes a mindfulness and an engagement with what's going on to stay curious and to keep questions. I'd always have, again, quite organised, it's the running theme in my life, but I had a running note of questions for myself, which, I could very well find out those answers myself and just continue to feed into my knowledge base, but also questions for my supervisor as to why certain strategic choices were made at different times. So that was sort of how it was in the first couple of weeks. In terms of a week of being a family pupil, lots of sitting on trains, new papers, new cases. Occasionally, or very often actually, you join in at a midpoint of a case already running. So it's learning about what's happened in the past. But there are lots of opportunities for networking too. An average week or so, there might be one or two evenings that I'd be either at a networking event with solicitors or internally in chambers. But it was a really good opportunity for me to start getting my face out there, getting my name out there, start chatting away to solicitors who then, when I did start my second six, started to instruct me.
Yeah.
And people are human beings. They want to connect. And so connecting over a shared interest in a TV show or a particular cuisine or whatever it might be that you chat about with someone, those are the basis of forming relationships with solicitors, which is incredibly important. And I can only imagine will continue to be as I continue to build my practice.
And as you mentioned, you are now a tenant at 14 Chambers here in Gray's Inn. I've asked you about what it felt to get pupillage, but of course pupillage isn't the end of the journey. Tenancy isn't the end of the journey in the sense of the career, but it's the part that essentially rubber stamps you and your future. That's really the part you worked for. So tell us this, Anu.
Yes.
What does it feel like when, after that pupillage, you are notified that you have been accepted as a tenant and you're asked to accept that tenancy? What does that feel like?
The rubber stamp is such a good word to use for this, because I'm in. That's what was in my mind. And there's as friendly as people can be in Chambers, there is that tiny or that real thin sort of film between accessing being in. And it's such a year of vulnerability as a pupil, because I was at times overthinking my responses, overthinking the way I'd said, was that too much of a joke, or should I pull, should I push? And there's that constant anxiety and unease about wondering. And it can be helpful to get some feedback and things, but a lot of the time you are just waiting with bated breath until you've done the interview and then found out the outcome. And so it's just I'm in. Also, I don't have a boss, which is scary and comforting.
Yeah.
I work quite well being self-employed. And it's so comforting to still be part of a bigger community in Chambers. And the juniors are, as much as I don't have an assigned supervisor, there are a number of people who are so willing to sit down, talk through something with you, just chat about how you might take something forward, or talk through advice that you plan to give. And to actually, you mentioned reflective practice earlier, but have that sort of peer supervision and that peer space to reflect, debrief, unwind, and sometimes have a little vent to. I think that those spaces are incredibly important in Chambers, but also it still maintains having one's autonomy.
Yeah, that's absolutely fascinating. And I just want to divert before we conclude, because as I mentioned from the outset, and you spoke beautifully about this rainbow essentially that represents your life, or you want it to. You want all the colours to be in there. And bridging the bar is something I know that you've been very much involved with. Can you just divert with me for a moment to
Yes.
Bridging the Bar, what you have done with that organisation, what that organisation is, and really what its overall purpose is, and how perhaps it can help people listening and watching this podcast?
Of course. As Chris said earlier, I sit on the executive committee, so I'm going to be entirely biased with the following. But Bridging the Bar is essentially a charity committed to helping people who are from backgrounds which are unrepresented at the bar or less represented to access a career at the bar. And in terms of my first encounter with the charity, it really was as an aspiring barrister. I think I applied for a mentor. I got a mentor through Bridging the Bar. I went to various events that they had put on, or webinars. And then I had started working for Bridging the Bar in the operations side of things. So I really got to see the inner workings and the mechanics of how they produce what they produce, and the sorts of problems that can arise, and the sorts of considerations, the macro considerations that the charity can have too. In terms of how they can support someone today, the offering has streamlined into an academy. And the Academy is a programme, a year-long programme, I believe it runs from the academic year, that is a way for candidates to have filled in one application form, but it really opens up into a comprehensive plethora of offerings. So that can be, being on the Academy, a person has got guaranteed mini pupilages. I think it's 1 and sometimes 2 actually, which is amazing because those mini pupilages applications can be so tricky these days. There's that. There is a mentor that is assigned to a person. So I was a mentor last year. So it's a junior practitioner, not even necessarily a junior practitioner in that area of law that will take that person throughout the year to support them with getting pupillage. There are a number of chambers. So I know 14 partners, but there are a number of chambers who partner with Bridging the Bar to provide interview advocacy training. So some of those interview techniques that we were discussing earlier, coming into chambers, and sometimes it's the very fact of being in a building like this can help to provide that preparation of what it will feel like, to help quell the nerves so that when it does come, it's less daunting. Those sorts of things, this personal development, coming from underrepresented backgrounds, not always, but there can be a tendency to feel like a person doesn't belong here.
Sure.
And there's a steeper slope or a feeling of inaccessibility there, which can be there systemically, but also can be something to work through internally. And having those sessions to work through that personal development, as well as internships, all of those things can help to prepare a candidate be their best self as a candidate for pupillage. And I should say, with those internships, they are fantastic. Now, they are more of an optional thing for people who apply for them and get onto those within the Academy. But they are with the High Court, the Court of Appeal, the Supreme Court, which is incredible. They are with the Government Legal Department, with Advocate, with a number of different organisations, which is just an incredible experience to have one thing that provides all of that. I'm going to stop talking about Bridging the Bar because otherwise I'll carry on talking about them forever.
I get it. You're just like me. Once you're going, then you can you can come in, which it makes you a wonderful person to talk to because you're absolutely fascinating. Let me ask you, finish up with 2 questions, and the first is this, because you have had a fascinating and it seems to me dedicated journey to where you are now. Where you are now hasn't happened by accident. What advice would you give going back some years, perhaps when you first met that criminal barrister, the mentor, and the journey that you've followed? It seems to me that it has been one of dedication. It's been very, very carefully curated in many ways. But I suspect it hasn't always gone the way you hoped. Have you made any mistakes along the way? What advice would you give to your younger self at that particular stage?
I've had disappointments along the way. But I'm also quite a reflective person. So if there's no changing something, then there's learning from it. And that can be a win. In terms of advice that I would give myself, I would tell myself to chill out a little bit. Yeah. That's just for me. But actually, if I was giving advice to others, I would say, this is such a unique job. And it's bonkers to think about sometimes when, you think about a number of small things that can happen within this job. Make sure you know what the job entails when it comes to the work. It sounds very glamorous standing up in court and doing all of those things, but there are a lot of hours that people will never see goes into this job. And also other aspects of, does being self-employed suit a person? Does a person need to be part of a team and need to be part of a bigger whole? Financially, what that looks like. it really bears thinking about the less glamorous sides of the job. And I would encourage people to go in with an open mind, an open eyes, as open as possible, by having as much access to the bar as possible. Even sitting in criminal court, even if a person doesn't want to practice crime, criminal barristers are some of the most incredible advocates, standing on their feet orally. Things are changing, it's dynamic situations. Those are attributes that, even if a practice is less in court, still are very, very helpful at sharpening a person towards becoming a better advocate. So know what it is that you're actually applying for as much as you can. And my second piece of advice would be to work out how to look after yourself throughout the process, because life is tough and fun is very important. So I'd love to end with that.
That's a wonderful piece of advice. I'm going to ask you one more question,
Of
because
course.
you're in your early years now of professional practice. As we said, tenancy is the rubber stamp, and then you're launched into professional practice, and you're it seems to me in a really good place and excellent chambers. You're passionate about the work that you do. What are your hopes, dreams, ambitions for the future as you see it right now?
It's hard to think about it sometimes once you've achieved something that you were hoping for. I hope to keep doing new things in this job. As you said before, sometimes it's working out what you think you might be good at and what you think you might enjoy might be very different in reality. So I'm excited to keep doing things I've never done before, as scary as it is, to work out exactly where in the future I may want to refine my practice and specialise even further within the field of family law. I also look forward to getting involved with looking after the bar, or getting involved with the bar, I should say, as a whole a bit more, and how, for example, people wanting to enter this profession can be looked after, how people within this profession are managing, and whether that's okay or not. I think there was a pilot scheme run by the Bar Council very recently into reflective practice and how that might be effective within the bar. So things like that I'm really interested in, and just working out, okay, now I've almost I know what my job is. I know, how to do my job. What more can I do? What more can I assist in? What more can I be involved in? And just working out are those sorts of things I think would be very interesting for the few years coming up.
Anu, you have been an inspiration. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Chris, for having me.
Anu, I think, exemplifies yet again how interesting and exciting this career can be if you have a drive and ambition and a passion, and people in so many different areas of the law. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please like, subscribe, all of those things, because it makes a real difference to us. And we look forward to seeing you for the next episode next Friday. Goodbye.